Hi, welcome to the people of 1381. I'm Adrian Bell, and I'm joined by my colleague today. He's going to introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Herbert Eiden. I'm a research assistant on the project of the people of 1381.
So today we're going to talk a bit more about the work Herbert does. And Herbert, you study manorial records, looking for evidence of the rebels. So first of all, probably tell us a little bit about more about these sources.
Well, manorial records are produced on the manor. A manor is a big, or were produced on the manor. A manor is a big landed estate, which was owned by the lord of the manor, and he had jurisdiction over his peasants for petty crimes, for little misdemeanors. But it's also important because land transactions were recorded in the manor records, in the manorial court rolls. So if a tenant dies and the inheritance is then the way how it is inherited is written stated in the records. So when we are lucky, we have a series of these records of a particular manor, but the peasants also destroyed quite a few of these records in 1381, especially in the area of Essex, Suffolk, and Norfolk, but also in other counties. And then the first courts we have start with, this is the first court after the burning of the records. So this is how we sometimes know about incidents which are not in central or administrative documents. So if we don't have an indictment by one of the commissions sent to adjudicate the rebels after the rising, we only know about these events from manorial records.
Okay, that sounds pretty clear to me. And your work was, as part of the project, you were looking very closely at the lives of rebels. And so I thought it would be nice today if you got any examples that demonstrate what kind of person the rebels were, and perhaps also what happened to them following the rebellion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I should say as well is that the people living on the manor, the tenants, the peasants, had different social and legal status. So some were free peasants, some were unfree peasants, and there's a gray area between the level of unfreeness or the level of freedom. And some peasants actually held free land, were free tenants, but they also held some unfree land. Unfree land means you had to pay rents and services for the lord of the manor, and if you were personally unfree, which is a native or a villain, then you had to pay for certain events in your life. For example, if you're getting married, you have to get a license, or if a woman, an unfree woman, was bearing children or outside of wedlock, then she was fined for this. Or when a tenant died, he had to give his best animal or a sum of money to the lord of the manor. So we have then quite often it is stated when manorial records were burned by the rebels, it is stated that they were burned by the unfree tenants of the manor. So in this case, and then what happens afterwards is all their land and tenements is taken into the hand of the lords, which means it's confiscated, and then it's given out to the tenants again after they had to swear fealty, which is they have to swear allegiance more or less to the lord of the manor, and to had to pay and sometimes a quite hefty entry fine. I also should say that probably 90% of the people in the late 14th century lived on the land and from the land. So it's predominantly a rural society. And so what happened after the rising? Many peasants, they had to pay these entry fines, which was bad enough, but nothing much changed immediately after the rising. It depended on how who the landlord was and how vindicative he was, and or how personally he was attacked, and then determined the outcome of the punishment of the rebels. To give you but some people were unlucky, like Nicholas de Orford, who was a tenant in Houghton St. John in Norfolk, and we only know about him because of an entry in a manorial court roll, and this entry in August 1381 just states that Nicholas de Orford, who was a tenant, and he was a smallholder. He had a little bit of land, unfree land, and he had half an acre of free land on the day he was killed at North Walsham. And we know from other sources that North Walsham was the last skirmish or the last battle of the rebels against a force under the Bishop of Norwich, Henry de Spencer, who routed the leftover rebel band. So we know that Nicholas de Orford was there and he was killed. And we also know from this document, and this gives a kind of a human touch, that he had a 7-year-old daughter, Alice. So there's nothing known about a mother, so she might have predeceased him. So he leaves then an orphan by the name of Alice, 7 years old. Another case of another interesting case is because it shows that rebels were not necessarily young guns who are engaging in violent acts against the government. It's this guy is called Walter Spittebotter, and he's from Blackmore, which is in Essex, not too far away from Chelmsford. And he is indicted after the Rising by Joan of Kent, who was the mother of Richard II, for having attacked with others her manor at North Weald, Bassett, and stolen £100. I mean, the whole group, not he himself on his own, stolen £100 worth of goods and destroyed the court rolls. And when you look into the manorial records for Blackmore, you can find a Walter Spittebotter in June 1356 who died. So it must have been, and then his property is going, or his tenement is going to his son, also named Walter Spittebotter. So he must have been at least in his late teens when he took over, which means in 1381 he was in his 40s. And you can follow his career right through until I scroll down my other screen, because he dies in 1404. So this is a person we can follow, where we can follow his career at the manor for quite a while, and it gives us some meat to the bone, to the bare bone of his name and where he's from, and if we have a lot of those, and we have quite a few in our database, then we can make a kind of then we can do a proper analysis of actually what happened to a lot of these tenants after the Rising.
I was going to ask another question as a follow-up, Herbert. What do we find in manorial records to show us, let's say, the remembrance of the revolt, or how the revolt lived on afterwards?
Mm-hmm. Well, in some cases, we only a manor seems to be functioning normal immediately after the Rising, and then in 1382, 83, or 84, we have an entry in the court rolls that we cannot inspect the court rolls because they were burned, or the court rolls have been burned, and this is why a jury has to say now what the terms for this tenement was. In some cases, juries or individuals remember events in the 1390, the Peasants' Revolt, the event of the Peasants' Revolt in the 1390s or early 1400s, which is quite remarkable. Another way of remembering is, for example, the either late medieval or early modern stone crosses which were built around the site in North Walsham, which I mentioned earlier, where the last battle took place, and these were allegedly commemorative crosses for the Rising. Another interesting feature is that the incidence of unfree tenants sending their sons to school at the age of 10, 11 is increasing, and fines are increasing. And a good example is Ashell in Norfolk, where John Willimot, the carpenter, who had a very stroppy or relationship with the lord of the manor. For example, he didn't want to serve as the carpenter, or he didn't want to take up office. And after the rising, he is one of 3 unfree peasants who were fined for sending their children to school. So these are incidents of where there is a change or in the attitude of the landlords. What you can also see on the whole is that from the late 1390s, or from the 1390s to the late 1390s, early 1400s, the lords of the manor give up their own farming, which is called the demesne, on which they had tenants who worked on the unfree tenants had to work on the lord's own farm. So these farms are given out for a money rent. So all the labor services are slowly commuted into money rent, and this in turn then leads to, in the longer term, leads to an end of villanage of the unfree tenantry. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Herbert, and thank you very much for sharing all that with us today.